aludtam. Fölébredtem éjféltájba, egy barmom sincs az állásba.
Hungary today. An old man is singing for two folk song collectors. It's perhaps the twilight of an old tradition that had already begun to change in the last century. Just over 70 years ago, a young composer, Béla Bartók, set out to explore the musical culture of his countryside. Beyond the rough tones of voice, his keen ear detected a treasure waiting to be unearthed. He called his experiences a miraculous circumstance. There's a poor horse sound for you. It's an emotional experience to hear Bartók's original recordings. They're so rough, and they presented him with such problems, and such riches came of them. Bartók himself recorded more than 10,000 Hungarian, Romanian and Slovak folk tunes, besides some hundreds of Yugoslav, Bulgarian, Arabic and Turkish pieces. And collecting the stuff was only the beginning of the task. He wasn't just looking for quaint melodies. He was seeking the relation between the new language of the modern composer and the old musical mother tongue. So, sometimes in company with his friend and fellow composer, Sultan Kodály, he set off on his travels. And now, some 70 years later, we tried to retrace Bartók's footsteps. We set out across southwestern Hungary, the region they call Transdanubia. We're making for Iregzemce, one of the villages where Bartók began his folklore career. In his day, this was a region of great feudal estates. Nowadays, the village seems prosperous enough, quiet, almost deserted. Everyone had gone to the local fair, and here we got our first musical shock. And in the evening was the village dance, with the dregs of Western popular music being churned out by coincidence on the very site where in 2 short visits Bartók recorded over 300 tunes, the biggest harvest he gathered from any Hungarian village. A distant relative of Bartók's was estate manager hereabouts, and he arranged for Bartók to set up his machine in the village tavern. That tavern is now the local house of culture. It's the meeting place of the Béla Bartók Folklore Preservation Society, a resounding name for what is in fact a kind of old people's club. Elderly peasants meet here to gossip and play cards, also to sing and perform the dances of their youth, like the swineherd's dance. It's a Transdanubian speciality. It used to be a men's dance done with razor-sharp axes whose purpose was to protect the pigs against wolves and robbers. The wolves and robbers are gone now, and the dance has become a mere show of agility, usually for a mixed couple dancing over crossed sticks on the ground. In Bartók's day, the local landowner, Count Kornfeld, ruled from the manor house. Some villagers still remember that first Bartók visit.
Valamikor 907-ben a nővérem Csahi pusztán lakott akkor már. Mint még Kukuk puszta, az volt a neve neki. Este kérem szépen följött a Bartók, Csahiba volt egy kasznár, annak a felesége Bartók Amália volt, de nem volt testvérje a Bartóknak, hanem valami unokatestvérek. Ahol az asszonnyal gyűjt föl Kukuk pusztára, de legelőször már az volt a legelső dolga, amikor letette az asztalra, hogy hívják, fonográfot, igen, kürtje volt neki, mint a gramafonnak. Azt a dalt énekeltette vele, amit a nővérem ma Csahi pusztán beleénekelt.
We'd come to Irigzemche with Professor Alsfai, a specialist in the music of the region. And in certain respects, our recording session wasn't very different from those held by Bartók. A big difference is that several of Bartók's best singers were youngsters in their teens, now old or dead. Many of the songs are well remembered, though, by people like this valiant 86-year-old.
Már messziről kiáltja a füttének, hozzá-vissza ne vigyelj el a katona szeretőnek. Leégett a budapesti villanygyár. Egy szép barna-piros kislány sírdogál az oldalán. Nem gondolta ő azt a szombat este, hogy vasárnap 4 órakor vigyék a temetőbe.
In the countryside, Bartók felt he'd discovered a submerged world of music based on ideas quite different from the German romantic ones he'd been brought up with. He said, in their own small way, folk melodies are just as perfect as the grandest masterpieces of musical art. But it wasn't only the music that attracted him to the countryside. His inner world became more and more illuminated by his vision of peasant life, and he linked his notions of humaneness and freedom to nature and the working people of the fields. It's an idealized view, this vision of the happy golden village, and in fact, he knew from first hand that mud and misery were also part of East European peasant life. He had something of Rousseau, of Tolstoy, a kind of romantic anti-capitalist feeling that was to grow more intense throughout his life under the pressure of national and class hatred. Early in the 20th century, peasant life in Hungary was already changing, and peasant culture was changing with it. The stagnant semi-feudal world of great land ownership was being revolutionized by machinery. Nowadays, of course, with the big estates converted into cooperative farms, the transformation of the old peasant system is almost total. But if the traditions are altering, the songs are by no means dead. They're changing their purpose, entering on a second existence. The great collections of Bartók, Kodály and their successors are plundered by popular musicians such as the Shibo group in Budapest. They're urban youngsters who never share the life of peasants, but their reproduction of peasant music is lively, accurate, and entirely congenial to present-day city folk. The melody they're playing is one that Bartók recorded in Érexemce, a typical Trans-Danubian piece that belongs to the very oldest layer of Hungarian music. Variants of it may well have been brought by the Magyar people when more than 1,000 years ago they moved in from the east to settle in the territory of present-day Hungary. From the start, Bartók realized that just to write down a melody by hand as it's being sung isn't enough for such an elusive art as folk music. One needs to play it back over and again till every detail is uncovered. So Bartók said, the father of modern folk song studies is Thomas Edison. Poring for hours over his scratchy wax cylinders, he patiently analyzed what was happening within each performance. Transcribing ensemble music was especially difficult, even with the little groups of 3 or 4 musicians who traditionally made up the village bands. Most of such bands are comprised of gypsy players, but here and there, non-gypsy village groups persist, with a more sober four-square style that owes a bit to the late Baroque ensembles of classical Vienna. Like this village band from Modocha, one of Bartók's old stamping grounds. The music of such bands, with its off-center intonations, seems crude, perhaps, yet Bartók found charm and personality in it, and a number of ideas for use in such compositions as the 6th Quartet. All along the Danube are such quiet little villages, each with its band. Some are peasant amateurs, some are part-time or full-time gypsy professionals. We were told we'd find a good gypsy band a little way along the river from Modocha, in the village of Bodzisław. Bartók had his reservations about so-called gypsy music, and he and Kodály were indignant that whenever Hungarian music is mentioned abroad, the foreigner thinks of the kind of works that gypsies play in city restaurants. On the other hand, Bartók himself recognized the virtuosity of many village gypsy bands. In Bodzisław, not only the gypsy band turned out for us, but also the village house of culture dance troupe, one of the post-war manifestations that keep the local folk arts alive, even if it means turning them into a matter of public performance, a venture that has its pluses and minuses, often meaning more brilliance and less depth. Bartók never attempted to record groups playing in public, nor did he like to take performers into a studio. He preferred to record domestically, in the setting of the musician's own home, amid the family and intimates. In the past, a single fiddle served to entertain a community, but in Hungary today, the lone fiddler is rare in the villages. However, among Hungarians east of the present frontier, in Transylvania and Moldavia, the old practice of solo fiddling remains. In the village of Izmény, we met a representative of this tradition, the smallholder and part-time professional musician László. His ancestors had fled eastward into Moldavia in the 18th century to escape religious persecution. And in 1945, in the wake of the retreating German army, László had drifted back from Bukovina across Romania and via Yugoslavia into Hungary, playing his music all the way. Bartók would have respected him as a stubborn upholder of an old Hungarian instrumental tradition. Bartók loved to surround himself with peasant objects, handmade furniture and such. His study desk and chair were made to his order by a peasant carpenter, George Pentek, whose wife drifted between Transylvania and Budapest, selling furniture and embroideries. By chance, her singing voice is preserved for us on an old recording. That melody is not Hungarian, it's Slovak. We tend to think of Bartók as a Hungarian national composer, but in fact, early in his career, he became an enthusiastic internationalist and resolved to familiarize himself at least with the music of neighboring peoples, such as the despised Slovaks. In 1906, he made the first of his journeys into Slovakia and found there a treasure house of undiscovered music. From one singer alone, he obtained over 500 songs. And here, photographed by Bartók, is the very lady. In all, he recorded some 3,000 melodies in a few short visits. Slovak song had a strong influence on Bartók's tonal and expressive thinking. Echoes of it haunt even some of his most sophisticated works. He enjoyed the rhythmic elasticity of Slovak music too, and he incorporated this tune more than once into his own compositions. For instance, in the 3 rondos for piano. In 1909, we find Bartók kitted for the road with stout boots, stick, and cloak against the rain, ready to travel eastward into the Romanian villages, into wilder territory than any he had visited before. And here he stumbled on quite unexpected and hitherto unknown treasures. In the mountainous region of Maramureș, he made the most important discovery of his folklore career, the curious, rather oriental-sounding recitative that the locals call Hora Lungă.
Da unde vedeți fântâne da unde vede o fântâne tulbură apa și-o bemă.
It's a style of song that reaches out of Europe, beyond Iran, all the way to Tibet and Southeast Asia. In Maramureș, Bartók was surrounded by a pastoral civilization that seemed to have altered very little since the days of classical antiquity. Much of the music is meant for the ears of sheep rather than of humans, to quieten them, to assemble them round the shepherd, or to settle them for the night. The shepherd growls into his flute and provides a consoling drone like any sheep herder of Virgil's time. All across upland Transylvania, shepherd music hovers over the landscape, notably the sound of the giant Alp horn. In the western mountains of Hunedoara, the Alp horn is a heavy affair, maybe 9 feet long, made of 2 hollow pine staves bound with willow twigs. Oddly enough, hereabouts the players are nearly always women or girls. Perhaps it's because they do most of the herding while the men are busy wood cutting or mining. To get a clear note out of a wooden trumpet, you need to soak it well. When the girls gather with their Alp horns by the mountain streams, it's a prime chance for news and gossip. The Highlanders are excellent meteorologists, and they signal their weather prophecies to villagers lower down in the valley. This woman is blowing a warning that rain is threatened and they'd better hurry to get their hay in. In Hunedora, Bartók heard the midwinter carols called Kolinde. He recorded hundreds of them, wrote a large book about them, and made piano settings too. Their songs preserved from pre-Christian times, implying confident wishes for health and abundance. Squads of men and boys sing them, marching from house to house, and it struck Bartók how wild and warlike they sounded compared to the gentle, pious carols of the West. Their hero epics meant to cheer the neighbours during the anxious time of the dying sun. The Kalinda singing squads are rather like our midwinter wassailers, who sing their luck wishes in hope of reward. A difference is that Romanian wassailers have a whole repertory of carols specially suited for addressing to old people, newlyweds, shepherds and such. Here they're being asked to provide a song for the son of the house, a song designed to encourage him in facing the hazards of adult life. And so this carol tells of a young hero who fought a lion barehanded, bound it with silken thongs, and carried it down to the village to the admiration of the neighborhood. Bartók was very enthusiastic about the Kolinde. Pure vestiges of pagan lyricism, he said. And in his journey through these remote villages, it wasn't just the music that struck him. He was inspired by the whole atmosphere. One Kolinde in particular haunted Bartók's memory. The story of the old man whose 9 sons are transformed into stags. The father tries to tempt them home, but the stags have tasted the freedom of the forest and they say they can never return. From this Kolinde, Bartók made one of his greatest masterpieces, the Cantata Profana. For him, the carol was the cry of a man who tears himself away from everyday life to endure the solitude of total freedom. It's a message of pain and ecstasy, and Bartók was no stranger to either. Our travels took us to the district of Poderenge, which means the forest people. The villages here lie high in the mountains, bordered by deep, narrow valleys and cut off by thick forests. Until today, this isolated area has kept a material and spiritual culture of great originality. No doubt changes are taking place, but these are still communities where the ceremonial sense of life is dominant and music is a vital part of everyday existence. Births, marriages, deaths are not mere personal events affecting just the small family. They are occasions that call for the support and participation of the whole community. It was this embracing and consoling atmosphere that led Bartók, a lonely man in what he called the pseudo-civilization of the cities, to declare, "There is peace among the peasants. Hatred against their brothers is fostered only by the higher classes." Tied to this idea of fond participation is a funeral ceremony accompanied by a ritual song, of which Bartók recovered several versions. When a young man or girl dies unmarried, a fir tree is felled and brought near the village. It's met by a group of chosen women who decorate it gaily like the tree that adorns a wedding. Through the ancient song, the fir tree itself speaks and tells how it has been tricked with false promises and now will be left to wither at the head of the grave. It's a ritual with several meanings. Partly perhaps the decorated tree is meant to deceive the dead youngster into thinking that marriage has taken place, so that there's less likelihood of a fretful return from the other world. Then too, an element of sacrifice is involved. Also, behind the song is an expression of the community's affection and pity for the young person who hasn't had the chance to be fulfilled in marriage.